David's text arrived at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I sold the house. Pack your stuff. I stared at my phone screen, sitting in my modest living room with its second-hand furniture and discount store curtains, and I laughed until my sides ached. Then I started packing, but it wasn't my things I was gathering. Comment your city below and hit subscribe to join our global community. Enjoy the story. Let me back up 6 months to explain how my entitled son thought he could just sell my home out from under me. That's when my husband Richard died of a massive heart attack at 61, leaving me supposedly devastated and helpless at 58 years old. At least that's what David and his precious wife Vanessa assumed. The funeral was a performance worthy of Broadway. David stood there in his expensive black suit, the one I'd bought him for job interviews, accepting condolences like the grieving son. Mom's having such a hard time, he told everyone. She's completely lost without Dad. Vanessa clutched my arm possessively, steering me around like I was a confused elderly relative instead of a woman barely pushing 60. We're so worried about Margaret living alone in that big house, she whispered to neighbors. She just stares out the window all day. Complete nonsense. Of course. I was grieving Richard terribly. We'd been married 32 years, but I wasn't helpless. I was planning. You see, Richard and I had lived what appeared to be a comfortable but modest middle-class life in suburban Cleveland. David grew up thinking we struggled to pay the mortgage, that every family vacation was a financial sacrifice, that his college tuition nearly broke us. He had no idea about the Monaco apartment, or the Swiss accounts, or the portfolio of international real estate investments that Richard had quietly built over decades of working in import-export, which was technically true, though David never asked what exactly we were importing and exporting. After the funeral, David suggested I move in with them, temporarily. I smiled sweetly and declined. I need time to process everything here, where your father and I were happy. But Mom, Vanessa chimed in, her voice dripping with false concern. This house is so expensive to maintain. The property taxes alone must be eating up Dad's life insurance. I looked at her with interest. How do you know about the life insurance amount, dear? She flushed slightly. Well, I just assumed, with David being the beneficiary and all. Ah, so that's what this was about. They'd been counting on Richard's life insurance money and were discovering that being his son didn't automatically make David entitled to everything. Actually, I said pleasantly, Richard left me very well provided for, but thank you for your concern. The look that passed between them was priceless, pure frustration wrapped in fake sympathy. Over the next few weeks, they ramped up the pressure. David would drop by unannounced, shaking his head at the upkeep issues he'd suddenly noticed. Vanessa brought real estate listings for cute little condos perfect for a woman your age. Then came the intervention. They arrived on a Saturday morning with coffee and donuts, like they were bribing a child. Mom, we need to talk, David said, settling his 6-foot frame into Richard's favorite chair without asking. Vanessa and I have been discussing your situation. My situation? Living alone in a house this size, Vanessa explained patiently. It's not safe. What if you fall? What if something happens and nobody knows? What if I want to live my own life without consulting my son's wife? I asked mildly. David's jaw tightened. That's exactly the kind of unreasonable response we're worried about. Unreasonable. Because wanting independence at 58 was apparently a symptom of mental decline. We found a lovely assisted living facility, Vanessa continued, pulling out a glossy brochure. Sunset Manor has wonderful programs for active seniors. I flipped through the brochure. These people all look 85. Age is just a number, David said dismissively. The important thing is security and social interaction. I have plenty of social interaction. I had lunch with Patricia yesterday and book club on Thursday. Mom, David's voice took on that patronizing tone he'd used since high school when he thought he was smarter than everyone else. Patricia is nice, but she's not family. We're the ones who love you and want to take care of you. Love. Such an interesting word choice for people who'd spent the last month treating me like a burden they needed to warehouse somewhere convenient. I appreciate your concern, I said, but I'm staying here. They left frustrated, but I knew they'd be back. What I didn't expect was how quickly they'd escalate. The real estate agent showed up on Wednesday morning while I was watering my garden. A perky blonde named Cheryl with a measuring tape and a folder full of comparable sales. "Hi there. I'm here for the property assessment. You must be Mrs. Williams. David told me so much about you." I straightened up slowly, letting the full implications sink in. Did he now? He's such a caring son, wanting to help you downsize. These big houses can be overwhelming for someone in your position. Someone in my position. As if being a widow automatically made me incompetent. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said calmly. "I didn't request an assessment." Cheryl's smile faltered. "But David said he's handling the sale for you, right? Because of your situation?" "My situation is that I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions about my property. David has no legal authority to sell anything." The poor woman looked genuinely confused, but he seemed so confident about the timeline. "He said you'd already agreed to list by month's end." After she left, I called David immediately. "Mom, don't be upset," he said before I could speak. "I was just getting preliminary information. Market research. Market research for a house I never said I wanted to sell. Look, we need to be realistic here. You can't afford this place long term. Dad's medical bills alone probably wiped out most of your savings." Interesting assumption. Richard's medical bills had been covered by insurance so comprehensive it would make David's head spin. Insurance we'd paid for through the Monaco Shell Company. "David, I want to be very clear. This is my house. I didn't ask you to sell it, and I'm not going anywhere. Mom, please, just think about it logically. What happens when you can't maintain the yard anymore? When the roof needs replacing? When the furnace dies? I'll handle those things the way I always have." "With what money?" The question burst out of him like he'd been holding it back for weeks. "Dad worked for a shipping company. He wasn't exactly pulling down 6 figures. "Oh, sweetheart," I thought. "If only you knew what Daddy was actually shipping. Your father provided for me very well." "Right. But for how long? You're 58. You could live another 30 years, even with Social Security and whatever small pension Dad might have had." "David," I cut him off firmly. "I appreciate that you think you're helping, but this conversation is over." I hung up and poured myself a glass of the 2009 Bordeaux that Richard had bought by the case through our French distributor. One bottle probably cost more than David spent on groceries in a month. 3 days later, Vanessa tried the emotional approach. "Margaret, I hope you don't think this is about money," she said, settling into my kitchen with tea I hadn't offered to make her. "It's about family, about David feeling responsible for you. David should feel responsible for his own wife and future children, not his independent adult mother." "But you're not acting independent," she said, with just enough edge to reveal her true feelings. "You're acting stubborn, refusing to face reality." Reality. From a 29-year-old who thought a Louis Vuitton purse was an investment. What reality is that, Vanessa? That you're alone now, that this house is too much for you, that pretending you can handle everything yourself isn't helping anyone. I studied her carefully. Vanessa had always been calculating, but this felt like more than general greed. There was desperation underneath. "Are you and David having financial problems?" The question caught her off guard. "What? No, we're fine. This isn't about us." But the way she couldn't quite meet my eyes told me everything. They were counting on something from Richard's estate, and they weren't getting it. Because if you need help with something specific, you could just ask instead of trying to manipulate me into assisted living. Nobody's manipulating anyone. But her voice was tight now, defensive. "We just think it would be better for everyone if you simplified your life. Better for everyone." Translation: better for them if I was tucked away somewhere convenient while they figured out how to access Richard's assets. That night, I called my lawyer, not the local family attorney David knew about, but the international specialist who'd been handling Richard's offshore arrangements for 15 years. "Mrs. Williams," Jonathan's voice was warmly professional. "I was expecting your call. How are you holding up?" "Better than my son expects. I think we need to review the estate structure. Someone's asking the wrong questions." There was a pause. "I see. Are we talking about immediate family members?" "Unfortunately, yes. In that case, I think it's time we discussed your Monaco options." David's text arrived exactly 2 weeks later. "I sold the house. Pack your stuff." I was drinking coffee in my kitchen, the morning sun streaming through windows I'd washed myself the day before, when I read those words. The audacity was breathtaking. Not, "I'm selling the house," or "We need to talk about selling." Just the flat announcement that it was already done. I called him immediately. "David, what exactly do you think you've accomplished?" "Mom, I know you're upset, but this is for the best. The buyers are offering cash. We can close next month. And I found you a really nice studio apartment at Sunset Manor. Did you forget that your name isn't on the deed to this house?" There was a long pause. "Mom, legally, you might need to speak with someone about your options. Dad's gone now, and these things can get complicated." "Complicated how?" "Well," he was clearly choosing his words carefully. "Vanessa's been doing some research, and apparently, when someone dies, their assets get evaluated for estate purposes. There might be issues with how you're handling Dad's accounts." "Issues?" I almost laughed. Richard's accounts were so meticulously organized that the IRS could audit them backwards for 20 years and find nothing but exemplary record-keeping. "What kind of issues, David?" "Look, I don't want to get into specifics over the phone. The point is, I'm trying to protect you here. If you cooperate with the house sale, we can make sure everything gets handled smoothly." Ah, there it was. He thought he'd found some kind of leverage, some financial irregularity he could use to pressure me into compliance. "David, who exactly did you sell my house to?" "A development company. They're going to renovate it for resale. We got a really good price." "And the paperwork?" "That's all being handled. You just need to be packed and out by the 15th. I hung up and immediately called Jonathan. "He thinks he can force a sale?" Jonathan's voice was incredulous. "On what grounds?" "Apparently Vanessa's been researching estate law. They seem to think they've found some vulnerability. Mrs. Williams, your husband structured everything so carefully that you could disappear to Monaco tomorrow and never come back if you wanted to. Your property holdings are yours completely. Your son has absolutely no legal standing to sell anything. Then how is he claiming to have sold it? He can't. Not legally. Either he's bluffing, hoping to scare you into cooperating, or he's committed fraud. Let's find out which one." Jonathan's research took 3 hours. The callback was illuminating. "Mrs. Williams, your son didn't sell your house. He sold a house. There's a David Williams who put a property on Maple Street under contract this week." "Maple Street?" "About 6 blocks from you. Small ranch owned by David Williams, apparently a different David Williams, a 73-year-old man selling to move in with his daughter." I started laughing. He confused the addresses? Possibly. Or he's been deliberately misleading about which property he was targeting. "But Margaret, there's something else. I did some checking on your son's financial situation. And? He's in trouble. Real trouble. He owes about $60,000 in credit card debt. He's 3 months behind on his mortgage, and his car's about to be repossessed." So that explained Vanessa's desperation. They weren't just hoping to inherit from Richard, they needed to inherit from Richard. "What would you recommend?" "Call his bluff. If he thinks he sold your house, let him find out exactly how wrong he is." I spent the afternoon packing, as David had instructed, but instead of my belongings, I was carefully wrapping Richard's most precious possessions, the items that held our real story, the photos from Monaco, the documentation from his Swiss accounts, the certificates from shell companies in 3 different countries. David and Vanessa arrived at 6 o'clock with a moving truck and 2 college kids they'd hired to load furniture. "Mom, I'm proud of you for being so reasonable about this," David said, actually patting my shoulder. "The apartment at Sunset Manor is going to be perfect for you. I'm sure it will be. For someone." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "David, sweetheart, I need to ask you something. When you sold my house, did you happen to verify the address?" "Of course I verified the address." "Good. So you sold 412 Maple Street?" "Right. 412 Maple." His face went pale. "Wait, what's your address, Mom?" 418 Elm Street, darling. Same as it's been for 31 years. Vanessa dropped the box she'd been carrying. "What do you mean? David, what is she talking about?" I pulled out my phone and showed them the real estate listing Jonathan had found. "You sold Harold Williams' house. He's 73, moving to Phoenix to live with his daughter. Nice man. I met him at the grocery store once." David stared at the phone screen like it might spontaneously change. But I had the right address. I gave them the right address." "Did you? Or did you just assume you knew my address because you grew up here?" The moving truck sat in my driveway, useless. The college kids waited awkwardly by the door, sensing the shift in mood. "This doesn't change anything," Vanessa said quickly. You still need to sell. You still can't afford to maintain this place. Actually, Vanessa, I'm curious about something. David, you said earlier that there might be issues with how I'm handling your father's accounts. What issues? He looked trapped. Well, I just meant there could be complications. Such as? Mom, maybe we should discuss this privately. Oh, I think Vanessa should hear this, since she's apparently been doing research on my financial situation. I watched them exchange glances, the kind of look that passes between conspirators when their plan starts falling apart. The thing is, I continued pleasantly, your father left me very well provided for, better than you might expect. How well provided for? Vanessa asked. And there it was, the naked greed she'd been hiding behind fake concern for my welfare. I smiled. Well enough that I could buy Harold Williams's house too, if I wanted to. Cash. The silence that followed my announcement was absolutely delicious. David's mouth actually hung open, while Vanessa's eyes narrowed like a cat calculating the distance to a canary. What do you mean, cash? David finally managed. I mean exactly what I said. Your father was very good with investments. That was true, as far as it went. Richard had been brilliant with investments, particularly the kind that involved moving high-value items through international shipping networks and finding creative ways to legitimize the profits. The college kids were still standing by the door, looking increasingly uncomfortable. I paid them $50 each for their trouble and sent them home. David and Vanessa remained frozen in my living room like store mannequins. Mom, David said carefully, when you say investments, I mean that your father and I were more financially secure than we led people to believe. How secure? Secure enough that I don't need to sell my house. Secure enough that I don't need your help. Secure enough that I could live comfortably for the rest of my life without touching a penny of his life insurance. Vanessa found her voice first. Then why did you let us think you were struggling? I never said I was struggling. You assumed I was struggling. But you live so... She gestured around my modest living room. I mean, you shop at discount stores. You clip coupons. I like discount stores, and coupons are sensible regardless of how much money you have. David was processing this slowly. Dad left you more than we thought. Much more. How much more? I studied my son's face, seeing the calculations running behind his eyes. This wasn't curiosity. It was assessment. He was already figuring out how this information changed his plans. Enough, I said simply. Mom, this is great news, Vanessa said, her fake smile sliding back into place. It means we don't have to worry about you, but it also means you could really help us out with a small loan. There it was. The real reason behind all their concern for my welfare. What kind of loan? We've hit a little rough patch, David said, shooting Vanessa a warning look. Nothing serious, just some temporary cash flow issues. How temporary? How much cash flow? They exchanged another look, the kind that suggested they'd practice this conversation. Maybe $60,000, Vanessa said. We'd pay you back with interest. $60,000. It's not as much as it sounds, David added quickly. We just consolidated some debts, and the payment schedule got a little complicated. Consolidated some debts. Translation. They'd been living beyond their means for years and finally hit the wall. And you think I should bail you out? Not bail us out, Vanessa protested. Help us. The way family helps family. I almost laughed. These were the same people who'd tried to manipulate me into assisted living 3 days ago, and now they wanted $60,000 in family help. David, let me ask you something. When you were growing up, did your father and I ever ask you to solve our financial problems? That's different. You're our mother, and you're my son, which means you're supposed to make your own way in the world, not rely on mommy to fix your mistakes. His face darkened. They're not mistakes. It's just bad timing. $60,000 in credit card debt is not bad timing. It's bad judgment. How did you... Vanessa started, then stopped. How did I know about your debts? The same way I know about your mortgage arrears and David's car loan. When someone starts pressuring me to sell my house, I investigate why. They both looked genuinely shocked that I was capable of investigation. Mom, David said, his voice taking on a wheedling tone. You just said Dad left you very well provided for. $60,000 is probably nothing to you now. You're right. $60,000 is nothing to me. Relief flooded both their faces. Which is exactly why I'm not giving it to you. What? David, you're 32 years old. You have a college degree and a decent job. If $60,000 is nothing to me, then you should be able to handle $60,000 in debt yourself. But Mom, no. I stood up, signaling that this conversation was over. You came here planning to force me out of my home so you could access money you thought I didn't have control over. Now you want me to just hand you a different pile of money to solve problems you created. We weren't trying to force you anywhere, Vanessa protested. Really? Then what would you call arranging real estate assessments without my permission and booking me into assisted living facilities I never asked to see? We were trying to help. You were trying to help yourselves. And when that didn't work, you immediately switched to asking for money directly. David's face was getting red. So you're just going to let us lose our house? I'm going to let you be adults and figure out your own solutions to problems you created. That's cold, Mom. No, David. Cold would be doing what you tried to do to me, manipulating someone into giving up their independence and security for your benefit. They left without saying goodbye, slamming my door hard enough to rattle the windows. I poured myself another glass of Richard's excellent wine and called Jonathan. How did it go? He asked. They're going to regroup and try a different approach. What kind of approach? I don't know yet, but Vanessa's smarter than David, and she's more desperate. This isn't over. Are you worried? I looked around my comfortable living room, thinking about the Monaco apartment with its view of the harbor, about the Swiss accounts that generated more interest in a month than David made in a year. Not about money, I said, but desperate people do unpredictable things. I could have someone keep an eye on them. Not yet. Let's see what they do next. But as I hung up, I realized I was already planning my next move. Richard had taught me that in any negotiation, the person with the most patience usually wins. David and Vanessa were about to learn that lesson the hard way. I should have seen the legal papers coming. They arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a nervous young process server who apologized 3 times before handing them over. Petition for guardianship and conservatorship of Margaret Ann Williams, filed by her loving son David Williams, claiming I was suffering from diminished mental capacity and unable to manage my own affairs. I read through the documents with my morning coffee, admiring Vanessa's handiwork, because this was definitely her strategy. The petition claimed I was displaying erratic behavior, poor judgment regarding financial matters, and increasing social isolation following the death of her spouse. As evidence, they cited my refusal to accept appropriate living arrangements, my unrealistic claims about financial resources, and my paranoid accusations regarding family members' motives. Clever. Very clever. Make my independence look like delusion, my financial privacy look like confusion, and my resistance to their manipulation look like paranoia. The hearing was scheduled for next week. I called Jonathan immediately. They're claiming you're incompetent? His voice was incredulous. Based on what? Based on the fact that I won't do what they want. Margaret, this is more serious than their previous attempts. If a judge grants even temporary guardianship, they could gain control over your assets while the case is pending. Can they actually win? Not if we present your real financial picture, but that means exposing the very privacy structures Richard spent years creating. There was the dilemma. I could prove my competence by revealing my wealth, but doing so would destroy the carefully maintained fiction that had protected us for decades. What's the alternative? We fight it on procedural grounds, challenge their standing, question their evidence, demand comprehensive medical evaluation. How long would that take? Months, maybe longer. And in the meantime, they might convince a judge to grant temporary measures. I hung up and sat in Richard's study, surrounded by the books and papers that told our real story. Hidden behind the family photos and his collection of maritime histories were the documents that outlined 15 years of careful international business dealings. Richard hadn't been a simple shipping company employee. He'd been what you might call a logistics specialist, someone who could move valuable items from one country to another without attracting unwanted attention from various governments. Not drugs, not weapons, nothing that hurt people. Mostly art, antiquities, currency, and the occasional high-value personal collection that someone needed to relocate quickly. The work had paid extraordinarily well, and Richard had been smart enough to legitimize the profits through carefully structured investments. By the time he died, we owned properties in Monaco. Switzerland, and the Cayman Islands, plus stock portfolios that generated more income than most people earned in their regular jobs. David knew none of this. As far as he knew, his father had worked for Great Lakes Shipping Company, moving cargo containers around the Great Lakes region, which was true. It just wasn't the complete truth. Now, I had a choice. Reveal everything and win the competency case immediately, or find another way to protect myself without destroying Richard's legacy of careful privacy. The answer came to me as I was watering my garden that afternoon. If David and Vanessa wanted to play games with the legal system, maybe it was time they learned what real legal expertise looked like. I called Jonathan back. "I want to transfer some assets," I said. "What kind of transfer?" "I want to buy some property, locally, something visible." "What did you have in mind?" "Do you remember the development company that David claimed bought my house? Lakewood Properties?" "I want to buy Lakewood Properties." There was a long pause. "You want to buy the entire company? If possible. How quickly could that happen?" "Margaret, may I ask what you're planning?" "I'm planning to give my son exactly what he asked for." It took Jonathan 3 days to structure the deal. Lakewood Properties was a small local company that specialized in buying older homes for renovation and resale. They had about 12 properties in their current inventory and were always looking for capital investors. I bought them outright on Tuesday. On Wednesday, I had their lawyers send David a formal purchase offer for my house, at exactly the price he'd claimed to get from them originally. He called within an hour. "Mom, what is this? Some kind of joke?" "Not at all. You said you wanted me to sell the house. Lakewood Properties wants to buy it. But you said you didn't want to sell. I changed my mind. Isn't that what you wanted?" There was a long pause. "How much are they offering?" $200,000. That's a really good price." "I thought so too. But Mom, about the legal stuff, maybe we should discuss—" "Oh, I'm planning to fight the guardianship petition, David. I've hired some excellent lawyers. Maybe that's not necessary now. I mean, if you're being reasonable about the house." "I'm being very reasonable. In fact, I'm being so reasonable that I decided to invest in some local real estate development." "What kind of investment?" "I bought Lakewood Properties." Silence. "You... what?" "I bought the company. Turns out they were looking for an investor, and I had some available capital." More silence. "David, are you still there? You bought the company that wants to buy your house?" It seemed like sound business practice. I sell the house to them. Then, as the owner of the company, I control what happens to it. That's... He seemed to be struggling with the concept. "That's insane." "Is it? Or is it just good financial planning?" "Mom, normal people don't buy companies just to sell their houses to themselves. Normal people don't file false guardianship petitions against their mothers either." I could hear Vanessa in the background, demanding to know what was happening. "Look," David said, "maybe we all got a little carried away. Maybe we could sit down and work something out." "What kind of something?" "Drop the guardianship thing. You keep the house. We'll figure out our own financial problems." "That sounds very mature, David. So you'll call off your lawyers?" "Oh no, I'm keeping the lawyers. And I'm keeping Lakewood Properties. You never know when owning a development company might come in handy." After I hung up, I poured myself a celebratory glass of wine and called Jonathan. "The guardianship petition has been withdrawn," he reported. "David's lawyer filed the papers an hour ago." "Excellent! Now, I have another project for you." "What's that?" "I want you to research David and Vanessa's financial situation more thoroughly. If they're desperate enough to try legal manipulation, they might be desperate enough to try something else." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that people who file false guardianship petitions don't just give up because their first plan failed. They regroup, and I want to be ready for whatever they try next." But as I went to bed that night, I found myself thinking not about David and Vanessa's next move, but about Richard. He'd protected me so carefully, built such elaborate structures to keep our real life private. Part of me felt like I was dismantling his work by being so aggressive. Then I remembered something he'd said to me once. "Maggie, money isn't just about having it. It's about using it when you need to." I was definitely going to need it. The private investigator's report arrived 2 weeks later, confirming what I'd suspected. David and Vanessa weren't just in debt, they were drowning. 3 mortgages on properties they couldn't afford, credit cards maxed across 7 different banks, and a Mercedes lease they'd somehow managed to hide from me during their financial difficulties sob story. But the most interesting discovery was buried on page 12. Vanessa had been researching international asset recovery laws. She'd contacted 3 different law firms asking about recovering assets hidden overseas by deceased spouses. She was hunting Richard's foreign accounts. I called Jonathan immediately. How close could she get? I asked. Not close enough to access anything, but close enough to cause problems. If she involves the wrong government agencies, it could trigger audits we'd prefer to avoid. Meaning it might be time for you to relocate some assets, permanently. I thought about this while gardening that afternoon, my hands working automatically in the soil while my mind processed options. Richard's careful system had protected us for 15 years, but it was designed for a married couple living quietly. A widow under investigation by desperate relatives was a different risk entirely. The solution came to me as I was deadheading my roses. If Vanessa wanted to play international investigator, perhaps she needed to learn exactly how outclassed she was. I called my Monaco property manager first. Mrs. Williams, how lovely to hear from you. Are you planning a visit? Actually, Philippe, I'm planning something more permanent. Ah, you're considering the move we discussed? Richard and I had always planned to retire to Monaco eventually. The apartment was fully furnished. My resident status was current, and the banking relationships were already established. I think it's time, I said. Magnifique. Shall I have the apartment prepared for your arrival? Please. And Philippe? I may be bringing some unwelcome attention with me. American relatives who think they're entitled to my late husband's business interests. Philippe's laugh was warm and knowing. Madame, we have handled far more sophisticated problems than that. Your privacy will be absolute. Next, I called David. Mom, how are things going with Lakewood Properties? Wonderfully. In fact, I'm thinking of expanding my real estate investments internationally. Silence. Then, internationally? Monaco has some interesting opportunities. Your father always talked about European real estate markets. Dad talked about Monaco? Poor David. He still had no idea who his father really was. We traveled there several times over the years. Lovely place, excellent investment climate. Mom, maybe we should discuss any major financial decisions together. I could help you research. That's very sweet, but I have excellent advisors already. What kind of advisors? International ones. After I hung up, I poured myself some wine and imagined the conversation David was about to have with Vanessa. Let them research Monaco property laws and international banking regulations. Let them discover just how far out of their league they really were. But first, I had one more call to make. Harold Williams speaking. Mr. Williams, this is Margaret Williams from Elm Street. I believe my son may have caused some confusion about selling your house. Oh, yes, that was quite a mix-up. I hope everything worked out? It did, but I wanted to ask you something. Are you really moving to Phoenix? Well, that was the plan, but honestly, I'm having second thoughts. The house has so many memories, and starting over at 73, would you be interested in a different arrangement? An hour later, I'd agreed to buy Harold's house outright for cash, allowing him to live there rent-free for as long as he wanted. It gave him financial security and let him keep his home while giving me a second property on the same street where I'd lived for 31 years. When David called back that evening, I was ready. Mom, I've been thinking about your Monaco idea. Maybe I should come with you, help you look at properties. That's not necessary, but international real estate can be complicated. Language barriers, legal systems. David, your father handled international business for years. I'm not as helpless as you think. What kind of international business? Import, export. Logistics. Moving valuable items across borders. I thought he just worked for a shipping company. He did. Great Lakes Shipping specialized in international logistics, which was technically true. Richard had used Great Lakes as his legitimate front operation. David just didn't need to know about the other 90% of the business. Mom, about those advisors you mentioned, what about them? Who exactly are they? Because Vanessa's been reading about international financial fraud, and some of these schemes can be very sophisticated. There it was. Vanessa had convinced David that I was either being scammed or participating in something illegal. David, are you suggesting that your father was involved in financial fraud? No, that's not what I meant. Some people target widows, especially wealthy widows. I see. And you think I'm too naive to recognize that? Mom, please don't get defensive. We're just worried about you. Worried about me. Still. David, let me ask you something. If your father left me well provided for, and I have competent advisors, and I'm making sound investment decisions, why exactly do you and Vanessa keep treating me like I'm incompetent? You filed a guardianship petition claiming I was mentally incapacitated. That was a mistake. You tried to manipulate me into assisted living. We were concerned. You assumed I couldn't afford my own home. We were trying to help. No. David, you were trying to control me. And now that you've discovered I don't need controlling, you're trying to find some other angle. I hung up and immediately called my travel agent. If David and Vanessa wanted to investigate my international connections, they could investigate from a distance. I need to book a flight to Monaco, I said. First class, one way. The beauty of Monaco is that privacy isn't just a service. It's a cultural institution. By the time David figured out I'd left the country, I was already settling into my apartment overlooking the Mediterranean, surrounded by financial advisors who'd been protecting wealthy families for generations. Jonathan had flown over to help coordinate the transition. Your timing was perfect, he said as we reviewed documents in my Monaco living room. Vanessa hired a private investigator 2 days after you left. What kind of investigator? The kind that specializes in international asset recovery. Apparently, she's convinced you're hiding something significant. I looked out at the yacht harbor, where boats worth more than most people's houses bobbed gently in the afternoon sun. She's not wrong. The investigator's been asking questions about shell companies, offshore accounts, cryptocurrency transfers, all the usual suspects. And finding? Nothing useful. Your husband's structure was too sophisticated for a local PI. But Margaret, she's also been making inquiries through official channels. What kind of official channels? She contacted the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. Claimed she suspects you of money laundering. I nearly choked on my wine. Money laundering? She told them that a shipping company employee couldn't possibly have left his widow with enough money to buy real estate companies, and she thinks you're either a victim of fraud or a participant in it. The irony was delicious. Vanessa was so convinced that Richard's legitimate business couldn't have been that profitable, she'd convinced herself we must be criminals. What did the FBI say? They're required to investigate any formal complaint, but their preliminary review found no evidence of wrongdoing. Richard's tax returns were impeccable. His business license was current, and all reported income was properly documented. Because it was proper, Richard paid taxes on every penny he claimed to earn. Exactly. He just didn't claim to earn all the pennies. I spent the afternoon walking through Monaco's financial district, marveling at how much more relaxed I felt 6,000 miles away from David and Vanessa's schemes. Here, no one questioned whether a woman could manage her own affairs. No one assumed she needed protection from her own decisions. My phone rang as I was having dinner at Café de Paris. "Mom, where are you?" David's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "I'm having dinner." "Where?" "I went by the house and Mrs. Patterson said you left in a taxi with luggage." "I did? Where did you go?" "Monaco." Silence. Then, "You're in Monaco? Right now?" "I'm looking at the Mediterranean while I eat. It's lovely this time of year." "Mom, you can't just disappear to Europe without telling anyone. I'm 58 years old. David, I can travel wherever I want. But what about your house? What about Lakewood Properties? My house is being watched by Mrs. Patterson. Lakewood Properties is being managed by excellent staff. For how long? How long what? How long are you staying in Monaco?" I looked around at the elegant restaurant, the beautiful people, the sense of sophisticated calm that had eluded me for months in Cleveland. "I'm not sure. I might like it here." "What do you mean you might like it there?" "I mean I might stay. Monaco has excellent health care, beautiful weather, and cultural opportunities Cleveland doesn't offer. You can't just move to Monaco." "Why not?" "Because," he was struggling now, "because you live in Cleveland. Because your life is here. Because your family is here." "Is it?" "Because lately my family has been trying to declare me incompetent, steal my house, and investigate me for financial crimes." "We never—" "David, I know about the FBI complaint." Dead silence. "Vanessa thought I was involved in money laundering. Your wife reported me to federal authorities because she couldn't believe your father left me well provided for." "Mom, That wasn't meant to hurt you. She was worried someone was taking advantage, so she decided to have me investigated for federal crimes. She was trying to protect you. No, David. She was trying to find some way to access money she thought she was entitled to. And when that didn't work, she tried to convince the government I was a criminal. I could hear Vanessa in the background, demanding to know what I was saying. Mom, please come home. We can work this out. I am home. David. For the first time in months, I'm exactly where I want to be. But what about us? What about you? You're adults. You can visit if you want a relationship with me. You can call if you want to talk. But you can't control me anymore. I hung up and ordered dessert. The next morning brought a call from Jonathan. The FBI closed the investigation, he reported. No evidence of wrongdoing, and the complaint appeared to be motivated by family financial disputes rather than genuine concern about criminal activity. Good. There's more. Vanessa's private investigator hit a dead end too. Monaco's banking privacy laws are impenetrable. And without evidence of criminal activity, no one's going to help an American daughter-in-law go fishing for assets. Even better, Margaret, I have to ask, are you really planning to stay in Monaco permanently? I looked out at the harbor again, watching tourists and yacht owners living their quiet, prosperous lives without anyone questioning their competence or investigating their motives. Jonathan, for the first time since Richard died, no one here thinks I need to be managed, protected, or saved from my own decisions. Why would I go back to being treated like a burden? Fair point. What about David? David can figure out how to have a relationship with his mother instead of trying to have custody of her. That afternoon, I had lunch with Marie-Claire, the wife of Philippe, my property manager. She was about my age, elegant in the effortless way that French women master, and she'd been living in Monaco for 20 years. American families, she said with gentle sympathy. They often mistake interference for love. Is it different here? Here, independence is respected. Wealth is private. Age is not considered a disability. I'm starting to understand why Richard loved this place. Your husband was wise to prepare for your future here. Many American widows discover too late that their families see them as problems to be solved rather than people to be cherished. As we finished our wine, my phone buzzed with a text from David. Please call me. Vanessa wants to apologize. I showed the message to Marie-Claire, who laughed. Ah, they've discovered their fish got away. Should I call them back? Cherie, do you want to spend your evening listening to explanations for why they tried to have you arrested? I deleted the message without responding. The letter from David's lawyer arrived at my Monaco apartment 3 weeks later, delivered by courier as if urgency could somehow bridge the Atlantic Ocean and 6 months of terrible decisions. Formal notice of intent to contest the estate of Richard Williams on grounds of undue influence and mental incapacity of surviving spouse. I read it twice while sipping my morning coffee on the terrace, then called Jonathan. They're contesting Richard's estate? His voice was incredulous. Based on undue influence and my supposed mental incapacity. Margaret, they already tried the mental incapacity route and failed. Richard's will was crystal clear, witnessed properly, and you've demonstrated complete competence in managing your own affairs. What's undue influence supposed to mean? They're claiming that Richard was manipulated into leaving you assets that should have gone to his son. I started laughing. Richard was manipulated? By me? It's a desperation move. They're hoping a sympathetic judge might believe that Richard's financial arrangements were too sophisticated for a shipping company employee, so someone must have influenced him improperly. Someone meaning me. Someone meaning you. I looked out at the Mediterranean, watching a yacht pulling into the harbor. It was probably worth more than David's annual salary. Owned by someone who understood that real wealth whispered rather than shouted. Jonathan, I think it's time David learned who his father really was. Are you sure about that? He's accusing his own mother of manipulating his father for money. He clearly doesn't understand what kind of man Richard was, or what kind of marriage we had. This could open some doors you might prefer to keep closed. The doors are already being kicked down by private investigators and federal complaints. At this point, the truth might be less damaging than David's imagination. I spent the afternoon preparing documents I'd never expected to share with my son. Richard's real employment records. The international shipping contracts, the client lists that read like a who's who of wealthy collectors, art dealers, and families who needed valuable items moved discreetly across borders. Richard hadn't been a criminal. He'd been a specialist, someone who could navigate complex international regulations, customs procedures, and shipping logistics for clients who valued privacy as much as professionalism. The phone call came that evening. "Mom, we need to discuss this estate situation," David said, his voice carefully controlled. "Do we? Because it sounds like you've already decided I'm a manipulative criminal who somehow brainwashed your father into leaving me his own assets." "That's not what we're saying." "Then what are you saying?" "We're saying that Dad's financial situation was much more complicated than anyone realized, and there might be legal issues with how his estate was handled." "Legal issues such as?" "Such as assets that weren't properly disclosed, international accounts that weren't reported to American tax authorities, business arrangements that weren't documented through proper channels." "David, are you accusing your father of tax evasion?" "I'm saying that a shipping company employee couldn't have accumulated the kind of wealth you're apparently managing, and either Dad was involved in something illegal or you're not telling the truth about your financial situation." "I see. So either your father was a criminal or your mother is a liar." "Mom?" "No, David, I understand now. You've spent so much time trying to prove I'm incompetent that you've convinced yourself your father must have been incompetent too. Dad was a great guy, but he worked for a shipping company. He didn't move art collections for European museums or handle currency exchanges for international collectors." I went very still. "What did you say?" "I said Dad worked for a shipping company, not some international—" "No, the part about art collections and currency exchanges." Silence. "David, how do you know about art collections and currency exchanges?" The private investigator found some references." "What kind of references?" More silence. "David, what exactly did this private investigator tell you about your father's work?" "Look, we know Dad had international clients. We know he handled high-value shipments. We know some of these clients were paying significant amounts for specialized services. And we think you might not have understood the legal implications of some of these arrangements." I almost laughed. Poor David. He'd hired investigators to prove his father couldn't have made much money. And instead, they discovered that Richard had made a great deal of money doing exactly what he'd been doing for 15 years. "David, let me ask you something. If your father was involved in legitimate international business that generated substantial income, why would that be a problem? Because it doesn't match what we knew about his work." "No, it doesn't match what you assumed about his work. Did you ever actually ask your father what he did?" "He said he worked in shipping." "He did work in shipping. International logistics, specifically. But not just regular shipping." "No, not regular shipping. Specialized shipping for clients who needed expertise in customs regulations, insurance requirements, and international documentation." That's not illegal?" "David, why would it be illegal to be good at your job?" I could hear Vanessa in the background, demanding details. "Mom, if Dad's business was legitimate, why didn't he tell us more about it?" "Because discretion was part of the service he provided. His clients valued privacy, they paid extra for it. But the money was payment for 15 years of expertise in a specialized field. Your father was very, very good at what he did." "How good?" I looked at my apartment, with its view of the harbor and its collection of art pieces from clients who'd become friends over the years. "Good enough that we could afford a very comfortable life without you ever knowing about it." "We?" "David, who do you think handled the client communications, the scheduling, the documentation? Who do you think learned to speak conversational French and Italian to deal with European museums? Who managed the insurance policies for million-dollar art shipments?" Dead silence. "Your father handled the technical logistics. I handled everything else." "You worked with Dad?" "I was Dad's business partner for 15 years. "But you were just a housewife." "No, David, I was never just a housewife. I was a businesswoman who let you think I was just a housewife because it was safer for everyone involved." The confrontation I'd been avoiding finally came 3 days later, when David and Vanessa appeared at my Monaco apartment building, looking like tourists who'd wandered into the wrong tax bracket. Philippe called from the lobby. "Madame Williams? You have visitors. They claim to be your son and daughter-in-law, but they seem quite agitated. Send them up. And Philippe, perhaps you could join us in 10 minutes to discuss property management details?" "Certainly, madame." I opened the door to find David staring around my apartment with the expression of someone who just discovered their mother lived on Mars. Vanessa was calculating the square footage and harbor views with barely concealed greed. "Mom, this place must cost a fortune. It's comfortable." "Comfortable?" Vanessa walked straight to the windows. "This is a $2 million view." "Is it? I wouldn't know. I've never had it appraised." David was studying the art on my walls, pieces that Richard's clients had given us over the years in lieu of additional payment. A small Degas sketch, a Venetian mirror from the 1700s, a painting by a contemporary artist whose work now hung in the Louvre. "Mom, how long have you had these?" "Various lengths of time. Your father had excellent taste." "Dad collected art?" "Your father appreciated beautiful things." Philippe arrived precisely on schedule, distinguished and professional in his perfectly tailored suit. "Madam Williams, forgive the interruption. I wanted to discuss the renovations to the guest suite. Philippe, please meet my son David and his wife Vanessa. They're visiting from America." Philippe's smile was polished and impersonal. "Ah, family. How lovely. I hope you're enjoying Monaco." "It's beautiful," David said weakly. "Your mother is one of our most valued residents. The building is honored to have someone with her expertise in international art acquisition." Vanessa's head snapped around. "Art acquisition?" "Oh, yes. Madame Williams has an exceptional eye. The collection she and her late husband assembled is quite remarkable." "Collection?" Philippe looked confused. "You weren't aware of your parents' collection? But surely you've seen the pieces in storage in Geneva?" "Geneva?" David's voice was barely a whisper. "Philippe," I said smoothly, "perhaps we could discuss the renovations another time." "Of course, madame. But regarding the insurance policies on the new acquisitions, later, please." Philippe left with a slight bow, having delivered exactly the impression I'd hoped for. David collapsed into one of my leather chairs. "Mom, what collection in Geneva?" "Your father and I acquired some pieces over the years." "What kind of pieces?" "Art, antiques, items that clients sometimes offered as payment for complex shipping arrangements." "How many items?" I sat across from him, pouring myself a glass of wine without offering any to them. "David, why exactly are you here?" "To understand what's happening. 6 months ago, you were a widow living in a suburban house, clipping coupons and worrying about property taxes. Now you're living in Monaco with art collections and Swiss storage facilities." "I was never worried about property taxes." "You assumed I was worried about property taxes." "Because Dad worked for a shipping company." "Your father owned a specialized international logistics firm that happened to operate under the Great Lakes shipping umbrella for regulatory convenience." Vanessa finally found her voice. "You're saying Richard was secretly wealthy?" "I'm saying Richard was openly wealthy to people who needed to know, and privately wealthy to everyone else." "How wealthy?" David asked. I studied my son's face, seeing Richard's eyes, but none of Richard's understanding of when to stop asking questions. "Wealthy enough that your attempts to manipulate me were always doomed to fail." "We weren't trying to manipulate." "David," I set down my wine glass, "you tried to have me declared incompetent. You filed false real estate transactions. You reported me to federal authorities for money laundering. Your wife hired private investigators to find assets she could claim. What exactly would you call that behavior?" "We were trying to protect." "You were trying to steal." The words hung in the air like a confession. "Mom, that's not fair," Vanessa said. "We were worried about your financial security." "You were worried about your financial security. There's a difference. If you were always this wealthy, why didn't you help us when we asked?" I almost laughed. "Help you? Vanessa, you tried to have me committed to assisted living so you could access my assets. Why would I reward that behavior with money?" "But we're family." "No, you're relatives. Family doesn't try to have each other arrested." David was staring at a photograph on my side table. Richard and me at a gallery opening in Paris, dressed formally and clearly comfortable among expensive art and sophisticated people. "When was this taken?" 3 years ago. We went to Paris every spring for the auction season." "Auction season?" "When the major auction houses sell significant pieces. Your father had clients who collected very specific types of art." "What types?" "Medieval manuscripts, Renaissance paintings, Chinese ceramics, whatever they were passionate about and could afford to acquire legally." "Legally?" "David, Your father never handled anything stolen or questionable, but wealthy collectors sometimes need items shipped discreetly to avoid publicity, insurance complications, or unwanted attention from governments that might prefer certain pieces remain in their countries of origin. That sounds like exactly the kind of work that pays very well when done expertly and confidentially. Vanessa was doing calculations I could practically see. So when you said you could afford to buy our house cash, I meant I could buy your entire neighborhood, cash. And when you bought Lakewood Properties, that was pocket money. How much pocket money? David asked. Enough to make your $60,000 in credit card debt look like what it is, a minor inconvenience that adults should handle themselves. They left an hour later, subdued and clearly overwhelmed. David hugged me goodbye with an uncertainty that felt like grief, as if he was mourning the mother he'd thought he knew. After they were gone, I called Philippe. How did I do? Magnifique. They will need several days to process the new information. And if they try to cause trouble legally? Madame? Your paperwork is impeccable, your assets are properly documented, and your son has already demonstrated his willingness to make false accusations. No court will take him seriously now. I poured myself another glass of wine and watched the sun set over the Mediterranean. Tomorrow, I would decide whether David and Vanessa deserved a place in my new life, or whether some bridges were better left burned. But tonight, I was simply going to enjoy being exactly who I'd always been, a woman who'd learned to play by other people's rules until she was strong enough to make her own. 6 months later, David came back to Monaco alone. I was expecting him. Jonathan had called to warn me that David had been asking questions, not the suspicious, accusatory questions of before, but the careful, respectful questions of someone who finally understood he was out of his depth. He wants to know if you'd be willing to meet, Jonathan had said. He says he owes you an apology. Just David? Just David. Apparently, he and Vanessa are getting divorced. I see. He also says he's been going to therapy, something about understanding family dynamics and learning to respect boundaries, which was promising, but I'd learned to be cautious about David's sudden revelations. He looked different when Philippe escorted him to my apartment. Quieter, less entitled. He'd lost weight, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen since he was a teenager, uncertainty that wasn't self-serving. Mom, he said simply, thank you for seeing me. You're my son, David. I'll always see you. We sat on my terrace, overlooking the harbor. I served coffee and waited. I owe you an enormous apology, he began. Not just for the legal stuff, but for everything. For the way I treated you after Dad died. For assuming you needed my protection instead of asking what kind of support you actually wanted. Go on. Vanessa and I were drowning financially, and instead of dealing with our own problems, we decided you were the solution. We convinced ourselves you needed us, but really, we needed you. And when we realized you didn't need us at all, instead of respecting that, we got angry. We tried to force you to need us. I sipped my coffee, watching a yacht pull into the harbor. The same patient observation that had served me so well in Richard's business. The therapy helped me understand something, David continued. I never actually knew you. I knew the version of you that you showed me, but I never asked about your real thoughts, your real interests, your real capabilities. Why do you think that was? Because I was more comfortable with a mother who needed me than with a mother who was more successful than I was. The honesty was surprising. David, you were never supposed to be more successful than your parents. You were supposed to be successful in your own right. I know that now. But Mom, I need you to understand something. When Dad died, I was terrified. Not just of losing him, but of being responsible for you. I thought you'd be helpless. And I was afraid I wasn't capable of taking care of you the way he did. So you decided to control me instead. I decided to try, which was stupid because you never needed controlling. No, I didn't. The private investigator told us about Dad's business. The real scope of it. Mom, you were essentially running an international art and antiquities logistics company. Your father and I ran it together, while letting me think you were just a housewife who needed protection. Would you have been able to handle the truth when you were younger? David considered this. Probably not. I was so focused on proving myself, on being the man of the family after Dad, that I wouldn't have understood that you were already more accomplished than I could hope to be. You're accomplishing your own things, David. Your engineering degree, your job, your independence, those are real achievements. But they're not international business management and art acquisition. They're not supposed to be. You're supposed to be you, not me. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the afternoon light change on the water. Mom, Vanessa and I are getting divorced. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Really? I'm sorry you're in pain. I'm not sorry you're free of someone who tried to have me arrested. She was desperate. She thought she'd married into a family with money, and when Dad died, she panicked that she'd miscalculated. And you? I thought I'd inherited a problem. Instead, I'd inherited from a woman who'd been solving problems for decades. Your father and I protected you from adult responsibilities until you were ready for them. Maybe we protected you too well. Maybe I wasn't ready as soon as I thought I was. David stayed for dinner, and for the first time since Richard's funeral, we had a real conversation. He told me about his work, his divorce, his therapy. I told him about Monaco, about the art collection, about the foundation I was starting to help other widows navigate financial independence. "Can I ask you something?" he said as the evening wound down. "Of course. Do you think you'll ever come back to Cleveland?" "I don't think so. My life is here now." "I understand. But Mom, would it be okay if I visited sometimes? I'd like to actually get to know you." "I'd like that very much." After he left, I sat on my terrace with a glass of Richard's favorite wine, thinking about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. David had texted me that he'd sold my house, and I'd laughed because I knew he couldn't. But the truth was even better. He'd thought he could because he'd never understood what I was capable of. The house in Cleveland was still mine, managed by caretakers, until I decided what to do with it. Lakewood Properties was thriving under professional management. My investments were generating more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. But the best part wasn't the money. It was waking up every morning as myself, not as someone's wife or mother or burden or responsibility, but as Margaret Williams, a woman who'd built a successful international business, raised a son who was finally learning to be an adult, and created a life on her own terms. David's text had been meant to humiliate me. Instead, it had liberated me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just becoming everything you were always capable of being, once everyone stops trying to convince you that you're smaller than you are. I raised my glass to the Mediterranean sunset and to Richard's memory. "Thank you," I whispered, "for trusting me to handle this my way." And then I started planning my next acquisition. After all, I had a business to run.